Awesome. Yeah. So in this event, we will be introducing the role of storytelling in community science and environmental change. We've invited a couple fantastic speakers who will be sharing more about their projects, how they integrate environmental stories in their work, and they can speak about their creative and scientific process. And I really hope that through this event, we can all learn more about storytelling and what that can look like in a community environmental science context. For anyone not familiar with Public Lab, I can give a super quick overview. So Public Lab's mission is to pursue environmental justice through community science and open technology. We create tools that are low cost, open source, easy to use. And these tools enable community members to monitor their local environmental conditions and also take action against environmental injustices. We help facilitate knowledge sharing across community science groups, artists, activists, researchers, scientists, you name it. Anyone with an interest in environmental justice and community science. We can do some quick introductions. I think so. The speakers will kind of give deeper intro during their talks, but we can just go around the room and just say hello, maybe what organization you're from, and you know, where you're calling from. And I know some folks dropped it in the chat, so feel free to unmute if you're comfortable. If not, you can just leave your intro in the chat. And I can go first. My name is Vania, and I'm the Air Quality Research Curation Fellow at Public Lab, and I'm calling from Santa Barbara.
I'll go next. I'm Susan. I am calling in from Madison, Wisconsin. And I am a special projects manager with 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. We're a nonprofit that does land use planning for communities all across the state.
I can go next. Sorry, I'm finishing my breakfast over here. My name is Jessica Jewell. I'm the digital director for an organization called the Water Hub. We focus on water justice, water access, water safety, and issues impacting frontline communities, and are looking to learn more from you and improve our storytelling and listen to y'all. Calling from LA.
I'll go next. I just sent mine into the chat as well. So I'm Alana Moore. I'm calling in from New Orleans, Louisiana. I work with Public Lab doing KIT's work, and I'm really interested in environmental storytelling using maps and other forms of data visualizations.
That's a good segue for me. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm a graduate student at the University of New Hampshire, so calling in from New Hampshire. And my research is on environmental storytelling and environmental justice mapping, so it ties in very nicely.
I can introduce myself. I'm Kat. I'm calling from the UK, but I'm from California originally. I actually work at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, which is an ethnographic and anthropological museum, but some of our programming strands that are coming up focus on storytelling through the environment and telling the Anthropocene from a different perspective. So I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say.
I can go next. I'm Emily Bernhardt. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington. I'm the Empathy Network Specialist at Woodland Park Zoo. So I help coordinate a group of 20 AZA zoos on various states throughout the US. And a lot of our partners use storytelling in their zoological programs to help inspire empathy for the animals in their care and their guests. So I'm really interested to see what y'all have to say today.
I'll go. I'm Mike from the State University of New York. My campus is about an hour south of Buffalo, right on Lake Erie. We do a lot of work on trying to do large scale data collection to tell stories in communities. So ties into community mapping, to humanitarian mapping, and those things. So and story is at the heart of everything I think that we try to do and need to do. So thanks for this opportunity.
I can go next.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm Hannah. I'm one of the presenters today with Lycan City Sci, she, her, and I'm coming from New Mexico, and my background is science communication and public engagement, and my career has taken that many pathways, so excited to share more in a bit.
And I'll go next. I'm Kareth Kelly. I do Trash is Ugly. I'm a Five Guyers teaching ambassador out here in Los Angeles, moving hopefully in the next week for this Earth Month, one of the unified school districts to no styrofoam. So we talk about the story of trash. And so I'm interested to meet my other storytellers that teach through story.
That's awesome. Anyone else who hasn't unmuted and want to say hi?
I can go, Vania. Thank you so much. My name is Maru Garcia, she, her. I'm calling from LA, and I will be presenting some of my work that I've been doing regarding communication of this type of environmental concerns, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Bethany, do you want to say hi too?
Yeah, I just don't want to take up any extra time. I'm one of the presenters today, and I'm calling in from the traditional and current homelands of the Lenape people, Lenapehoking, in Philadelphia. It's beautifully sunny here and finally feels like spring. I hope that you're feeling that wherever you may be calling from.
Thank you. And for anyone who has just joined, feel free to introduce yourselves to the chat. We will be moving on with our agenda. I want to make sure the speakers have enough time to talk about all of the awesome work that they're doing, and so great to hear all of your backgrounds and your interests, and because you are all more expert at storytelling than I am, so bear with me as kind of we walk through the agenda and program, but again, really excited that we're all here. So before we launch into our wonderful speaker presentations, I just wanted to kind of help us level set a little, and a lot of you may already know this, so it might be a refresher, but for anyone who might not be as familiar with storytelling, I wanted to just give a brief kind of overview and context of what story structure is, how it works, before we launch into our presentations. So I have a very bare bones. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so storytelling brief primer. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the elements of stories. We've all listened and told a bajillion stories, but the good stories have these elements of characters and timelines, tension and resolution. And it has been used everywhere for teaching lessons, communicating societal norms, entertaining people, and connecting individuals. So what if we use stories to teach people about environmental issues? And to back up a bit, again, if you already know this is going to be a refresher, a lot of science communication has been based on deficit model, which presumes that presenting facts to people will be sufficient to get them to change their beliefs and change their actions. However, this is an incomplete model, which is why, despite so much data and facts on issues like climate change, pollution, vaccines, we still can't seem to agree on the right path forward. So what is missing from this model? I think one of the key things that's missing is kind of the concept of identity protection mechanism of our brains, which selectively focuses on the information that that are only consistent with our beliefs and our identities. So when we're presented with statements or facts that are contradictory to what we believe already, we process them the same way we process physical threats, which makes it really hard to get people to change their minds with cold, hard facts. And so why do stories work, and how do they work? They work by bypassing some of our protective mechanisms for that we just talked about, the identity protection mechanism. When you listen to someone tell a story, our brain waves actually sync up with theirs, and they allow us to humanize the information receive and understand information in a way that doesn't trigger our defense mechanisms. And this kind of helps us make sense of change by allowing us to mentally test drive someone else's experience. And these effective use of stories also help take advantage of ways that our brain naturally works by pattern matching, finding similarities to things that we already know about, and social knowledge, which helps provide context for other information and helps us understand ourselves in relation to others. I really like this quote from report from the Center of Storytelling. We often believe in the story not because it is factually true, we accept it as true because it connects with our values or is relevant in our experiences in a way that is compelling. And with that, that's all from me, but I will introduce our first speaker, and just some logistics. If you have any questions, paste it in the chat. And if we have time at the end of each presentation, our speakers can answer like 1 or 2 questions. But if not, we also have 15 minutes at the end for general Q&A, where we can get to any of your questions. And with that, our first speaker, Dr. Wiggin, is Associate Professor and Director of the Environmental Humanities Program at UPenn, and she'll be speaking about community-based participatory action research project called Futures Beyond Refining.
Great, thanks. I'm so glad to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. It's really exciting to hear a little bit about each of the people in the Zoom room with us today. I'm really looking forward to learning from you and hearing any feedback and learning about the exciting projects that you are working on. Special thanks to Vanya and the team at Public Lab for asking me to speak with you about the power of story, which I think of really as storytelling, and maybe more importantly, even story sharing, and how that can be part of community science. A few years ago, when I helped students at the University of Pennsylvania launch our program in environmental humanities, the Public Lab's model of open science inspired us to think about how a university-based research group might work with community-based researchers to address enduring and emergent environmental harms. The environmental humanities offers a kind of contact zone in which environmental researchers who work within diverse epistemological frames can collaborate. I am by training a literary historian, and so I'm perhaps disciplinarily predisposed to believe in the power of story. My hunch, however, is, as Vanya already indicated, backed up by a wealth of work in cognitive psychology and science communication that has generated something of a cottage industry of storytelling for scientists and popular claims for the power of story that, at least to me, sometimes feel inflated. But nevertheless, the public research projects that I work on are indeed propelled by story work. And I'm really glad to take up Vanya's request to share some of that work with you. I lead a public climate storytelling project called My Climate Story, which puts the power of story in the project's very title. And I wanted to show you that slide just to ask for you to check it out in your free time. If you have time, I'd love to talk with you about it. But I'm here to talk to you today about Futures Beyond Refining. And this project is a campus community collaboration that began in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic explosion of the Philadelphia petroleum refinery. At that time, in 2019, it was the oldest continuously operating refinery in the world. Today, the 1,300-acre former refinery lands are undergoing rapid transformation into a logistics hub. And I wanted to just show you some of the documentation that our team has been collecting as the huge infrastructure is slowly dismantled. And here you see two shots, one from about a year and a half ago, and this one from about a year ago. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to introduce this project to you in the hope that it might offer some practical ideas for your own community-based work. But before I do that, I want to share with you a short story from another project researcher and a powerful storyteller, part of the Futures Beyond Refining collaborative, Mrs. Tammy Reeves.
Really scary to know. Whenever I was in that plant, it's killing. They lied to us. You ask them today, they'll continue to lie and say it's not harmful. Oh, it is harmful. They're harmful. If door closed down, why are there still fumes coming out of it? So what they said was, oh, they're cleaning the pumps over there. It's not hazardous. They told us it wasn't hazardous. If it's not hazardous, why do you need to do hazardous over the
So in my opinion, Mrs. Reeves is one of the most gifted storytellers I know. That phrase, if it's not hazardous, why are you wearing hazmat suits, is one that she's asked many times. And her question reveals a deep uncertainty surrounding refining infrastructures in Philadelphia and across the world. It's an uncertainty produced by an industry hardly known for its transparency, by national security concerns, and by centuries of environmental racism. I just want to show you this screen grab from the EPA's EJ screens. And what you see in that gray area in the middle of my slide is the refinery lands. And you see that there is actually no data available. This is a clear illustration of all we don't know about South Philadelphia. The paucity of data about the refinery's 160-year history of environmental contamination emerged in the glare of this 2019 explosion, and the health risks posed by legacy pollutants in Philadelphia rapidly multiply with local climate impacts: hotter weather, more rain falling, more extreme weather events, storm surges, and sea level rise. And I just want to give you Another screen grab, this one from Climate Central's Surging Seas, to show you that that same gray area where we have no data, where refining has happened for over 160 years, will, in even the most optimistic climate scenario of 1.5 degrees warming at 2100, those lands will in fact be regularly underwater. A few years before this explosion in 2019, I set out with a group of researchers in community and on campuses to counteract South Philadelphia's data poverty. We began by listening to neighbors' stories. A modest oral history developed in partnership with the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge and the Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalition helped us begin to understand the gaping uncertainties with which residents have long lived. They didn't understand or know, nor could anyone really know, what to do in the case of an explosion, what to do when floodwaters rise, what to do when nuisance flooding becomes chronic, and what to do when too many neighbors and family members become sick. With our Futures Beyond Refining project, our collective sought to amplify and add more stories to our databases. We collected and shared more stories in public oral history archives. We worked together to develop memory maps and created a tour of the refinery fence line, which you saw an excerpt of with Mrs. Tammy Reeves talking. At stops along this tour, neighbors offered a story of what it was like to live with the refinery. We invited school children, we invited other researchers, policymakers, and journalists to join us on the tour, and were able to generate major press attention from reporters who wrote about the tour after taking it with us. We lifted up these stories in formal policy arenas, asking policymakers to legislate the creation of environmental data that could provide the evidence needed to respond to the many risks that the fossil fuel industry has caused locally and, of course, globally. And we commissioned artists to work with us to help us create still more stories about what a future beyond refining could look like. So in my last few minutes, I'll highlight just two of those projects. Here you see Area of Interest created by Amy Balkan. And in this project, artist Balkan took up Mr. Charles Reeves's call to turn the refinery lands into a cemetery. And through a series of workshops, Balkan eventually created this temporary memorial to lives lost to refining. It's a billboard transformed into a visual essay and displayed for the month of June 2021 alongside the defunct refinery's northern yard. We also worked with the artist anthropologists of a group called Ethnologica to develop a visioning exercise designed to share stories about what the future of this cradle of petromodernity might look like in 2100. In workshops for local 8th graders, planned in collaboration with their science teachers, we created dozens of postcards picturing and narrating futures beyond refining. And I want to offer these just by way of conclusion. I think they're powerful evidence of the power of storytelling as tools for community science. Before we sent these cards off to policymakers, we photographed them, and they're included in an online gallery, which I've linked to in the final slide with further resources. But in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to the final of these postcards, because I want you to hear this 8th grade story as he sits in a science classroom less than 500 meters from the old refinery yard and on the banks of a river ever more given to exceeding its hardened bank.
Dear Donald Trump, I am a 94-year-old man living in what these kids nowadays call hover homes. We have marshes keeping our water blue and clean, boat taxis that take you places, and everyone swimming in the pools and stuff. Thank you. Well, not really thank you, but you need to help us from a citizen. P.S. Back in my day, we had wheels. Now we have boats.
Thanks so much. I look forward to any questions and comments that you might have, and of course to our other speakers.
Thank you. Lovely presentation. So great to see the involvement of students in this effort. We have 2 minutes, so if anyone has a really quick question, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat. Otherwise, we can save questions for the end.
I have a quick question. I love all the different formats and just like online, offline examples that you did here. I have a question with the reading that we just saw. How is this content distributed? Like, what channels did you use to like amplify that?
The content of the students' work has been really the what we could distribute were the postcards that they created. I showed you some of those, and they were mailed to public officials, but we of course didn't know what would ever happen to them after we dropped them in the post. So we photographed them and created a digital exhibit of them. Now with Philadelphia schools, we're not able to be in person for a very long time, and this project has been really dramatically affected by that. We are now again working in and with schools and hope to be able to share their work more broadly. And in fact, that was kind of the inspiration for a part of the climate storytelling work that we're doing now, where I was able to get a nice grant from the University of Pennsylvania, which we're basically re-granting to Philadelphia school teachers to be able to work with them and their students to generate their climate stories. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. But that video that you saw was one that I asked for his permission. I just said, can I take a video of you reading your story? Would you mind? And he was, delighted to do so. But it hasn't been shared in any more venues other than in presentations that I give about the project.
Thank you. And for any other questions, let's talk about them at the end of everyone's presentations. So our next presenter is Hannah, Program Director of Lycan City Sci and Science Communicator Fellows at the Forest Service National Air Resource Management Program. She'll be speaking about the Lycan City Sci project, which is really exciting, and I've heard a little bit about it already.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to get my screen going. Okay, can everyone see my screen? All right. So I want to just quickly kick off by saying thank you to Vania and Public Labs and the other presenters today. This is an awesome opportunity to be together and to share these ideas and then get input from everyone else, because that's the thing about stories, right? They change, they evolve, they grow, they take on more context as you add more information to them. Also, I want to apologize. I live on a fairly busy street, so if there is a lot of background noise, that is why, and I'll do my best to mute when I can, so apologies in advance. I wanted to also say that, Bethany, I really appreciated your share in bringing up the idea of uncertainty is really important when it comes to communicating anything, let alone science or stories or people's lived experiences. And so let's all keep that in mind. It's a really helpful word to come back to, I feel like. Okay, so Lycan City Sci, it's a community science project engaging publics in lichen biomonitoring work. Really briefly, I want to just thank the U.S. Forest Service. This project is funded through their Citizen Science Fund, and it's also supported by the California Lichen Society and the Biodiversity Research Collective. If you have any questions about that, I can share more information as we go on. So stewardship is really important when it comes to any project that we do. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the U.S. Forest Service forest lands and grasslands, and we respect their enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. We also acknowledge that there's ethnobotanical use and medicinal use with Lotharia vulpina and other lichens, which we focus on in this project. And I think on top of that, it's acknowledging too the lived experiences and the stories that come from these lands and these plants that we don't necessarily have context to or understand in our project, but we know that exist and we give them credit for that. So I'd like everyone to follow me on this little exercise. Close your eyes for a second and just take a few natural breaths, okay? And as you're doing that, I think it's really important to think about where you are and where the air around you comes from. Maybe you're in your house and you still smell breakfast that was cooked earlier this morning. Maybe you have a window open and you have fresh, crisp sea air coming in, or the exhaust of cars driving by. It's just really important to acknowledge that not everyone has access to the same air, and that we can really take for granted what it is like to have clean air. Okay, it can be difficult to make an argument with society that biodiversity matters. It is more accessible to make an argument that air quality matters because everyone breathes air and is impacted by air quality. So take a look at this image. On one side, you see clean air. On the other side, you see impaired air. This is taken in the San Gorgonio Class 1 wilderness area in Southern California, which as of 1990 began to monitor the air quality in that wilderness area. So something interesting that a lot of people might not know is that air is a federally protected and managed resource. And with that, resource managers have to use different monitoring equipment to understand what pollutes the air. And specifically, the angle I'm going for here in this talk is looking at national forest lands and grasslands. The data they get from monitoring this air helps inform policy and different resource management practices to help manage the resource that we're talking about here, which is air. So I found that really interesting. And when you think about it, there are a lot of different arguments about why clean air should matter. And I think in terms of storytelling, it's really important to think about audience and who you're talking to and who you're working with. Some of the constituents here aren't fans of the commentary around climate change or biodiversity. They're maybe more into recreation or hunting or fishing or riding dirt bikes or just hiking with their family or just being in nature listening to birds. And so I think being really mindful that the way we approach these stories really has to have an evolution and a life to it to support the different narratives of the people coming into these situations who might participate. So one really interesting biomonitor for air quality that I'm going to share more information about are lichens. They're really, really interesting. They're really showy. They're beautiful, but they can capture and absorb what's around them. That's how they get their nutrients. They don't have roots like traditional vascular plants. They absorb from the air. And so with that, whatever is in the air around them can be collected in their lichen tissue and analyzed in a lab. And that data will inform us of what pollutants, heavy metals, things like that are in that area. And so that's really useful because they're an inexpensive biomonitoring tool, and that they're also available in wilderness areas, which can sometimes be hard to have different monitoring equipment in. So not everyone might be familiar with lichens, but they're really cool, and they have many different uses. They can be used as dyes, they can be used as medicine, as food, as habitat. They're found in the fossil record going back to the Devonian, which is really fascinating to me. They're a symbiotic organism, so they're made up of 2 or more life forms: bacteria, cyanobacteria, fungus, multiple fungal partners at that. Their unique partnership allows a more diverse and broad habitat range for them to live and thrive. But as individuals, they wouldn't be able to in that context, which is really fascinating. And they're just showy, they're beautiful. They can elicit curiosity and wonder. And they come in many different growth forms, and I could talk about lichens for days. So please, if you have questions, happy to talk more about lichens. So the project that we're all here talking about today is Lycan City Sci, again, a community science project that engages publics around critical issues impacting public lands using lichens as air quality biomonitors. I think everyone in this hypothetical digital room today can understand that in today's world, with all of the different climate impacts and environmental impacts, creating personal connections to science, to the natural world, that is something that's vital, especially when we think about how to manage these resources, protect these lands, keep the air clean. How do we create those relatable daily live connections to things happening in the natural world when they're intangible? How can you talk about air when it's invisible most of the time? And then when you see it and it isn't invisible, it's like, oh, well, I can't go on my hike today, right? Like, what are these connections we can draw outside of our own understanding to help people make a relatable connection to why these things matter? So air quality is one of those really important things for us, and we want people to understand that it matters and that they can take it into their own hands through this project. So we focus on Lotharia vulpina here. It's a really beautiful fruticose lichen. It has these beautiful branching structures, grows on the bark of conifers. It can be found in like the western part of North America, also in parts of Europe. It's a pretty easy to find lichen because of that beautiful color. It's due to this acid called vulpinic acid. And it used to be used ethnobotanically as a poison. It's slightly toxic. I wouldn't go eating this one if I were you, but native people would use it to create like a harmful poison on tips of arrowheads and things like that to kill wolves and foxes. It's also used for dyes. It gives a beautiful color, similar to what you see. So this is the one we're focusing on for our project. So in the project itself, apologies for the loud noise, I'll just give you a little bit of background that there's 3 phases of the project. There's the digital toolkit, which is an online training and certification program designed to meet the user where they are. It has a few different communication mechanisms built into it. So there's something for different learning styles. There's like a matching activity, there's videos, there's a cohort interactive exercise. There's things like this to allow for people to learn at their own pace. And as you go through the training module, the information builds on the previously learned information. Then once you're certified, you get to go into the field and actually be in nature, experience the wilderness. And with that, you get to collect the lichens in the protocol that we've trained you in. Those lichens then get cleaned and sent to a lab for analysis and critical review. That process takes a little bit of time, but is well worth it and at the end. You can see in that map in California that's looking at nitrogen deposition from lichen tissue collections. And I think we can all play the game of green, yellow, red. Red, not really good. Yellow, borderline, not really good. Green, right at the threshold. Let's not let it get yellow, right? And so that tells us that in those areas, different pollutant sources in the air are either stagnant, hovering, or pretty intensely depositing nitrogen in those areas. So another reason we're all here today is that, yes, we want to get involved. Yes, we want to get people to tell their story and to be a part of a larger story. But with that, data is sort of at the center, right? With these community science projects, it's really beneficial that if we're going through all this effort to train people and to help them understand a scientific process that they might be a non-expert in, how can we then ensure the longevity of that data so it's useful and actually goes into the hands of policymakers and resource managers to make real change to protect, for us in this instance, air, right? And so through our protocol training, we actually do a federally mandated protocol to collect lichens to then use them in larger, the data in larger databases that is used by resource managers and policymakers. So the thing about air is that it moves. And that also means that pollutants in the air can travel vast distances. I know that seems obvious, but it's something to really think about. It causes harm to our health, our communities, our environment, and our future survival. So for example, in this very professional illustration, we have an industry with yellow squiggles polluting, right? And that pollution can go vast distances to wilderness, to impacted communities far away, pollute waterways, kill fish, can also hit fence-line communities, which we talked about in the previous presentation. I think all of these are things to take in mind, and everyone here has a story to tell, and how can we create a pathway? And that's something we're really interested in doing with our project. So there are opportunities if people are interested. We're actually launching our big pilot this summer in California and potentially in Oregon. We're very excited. There's lots of opportunities to get involved. We're aiming on working on a project to have more environmental justice influence in our work, to have a conversation about the wilderness in the urban environment, and how with the movement of air can we talk about pollutants and where they come and where they're going, and how that has different impacts. Yeah, so that's the project, and our aim is to really try and create a connection on why air quality matters, and how can we create pathways to either understand it better, to get directly involved with it, or to understand what's happening with the data we're getting and where it's going.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hannah. Lichen are so cool, and I hope everyone definitely has learned something about Lichen and your project, and loves the professional drawing. You know, we're at, yeah, so let's move to the next presentation, and then anyone has any questions, we can take them at the end. And if Bethany or Hannah, you want to drop in any links of ways that people can get involved, feel free to do that in the chat, and we'll also take that down in our notes. And our next presenter is Maru Garcia, artist and researcher, interested in creating spaces of healing, resilience, and regeneration. And she'll be speaking about her Prospering Backyards project, which uses the power of art, science, and community to address a severe case of lead contamination.
Thank you,
And would
Vanya.
you like me to share your screen for you?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
That would be nice. And I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties today, but anyway, we will make this work. But thank you so much for the invitation and for the other two presentations that were very inspiring and very important. Today, I want to talk about a project that I've been working so far in a couple years. You go next. Yeah, as Vanya was saying, this is named Prospering Backyards, and specifically is trying to address the lead contamination happening in Southeast LA and East LA. And I want to give a little bit of a context so we can understand what is happening here. Next one, please. So when we were talking about data and how we share this information with people, I was thinking about this because, yeah, starting talking about heavy metals can be very heavy. and as we see here, like, yeah, lead is a dense and soft heavy metal with high density. It has a relative inertness to oxidation, and that's why we've been using it a lot for applications, including construction, plumbing, batteries, bullets, white paints, leaded gasoline. And it was until the late 19th century when lead toxicity was recognized, and its use has started to be phased out, but still we have it in a lot of applications. Next. One of the current applications that we have is actually in our own cars. They are the ones that are storing the energy, and lead is used as a material for that in lead acid batteries. Next. So lead is a toxin, a neurotoxin that will affect the brain, the kidneys, liver, will be in the blood and arrive in the also reproductive system. It is interferes with a lot of the functioning of biological enzymes. And of course, it has a very difficult effect, especially in children, because as diverse research have shown, their nervous system is still developing, their brains are still developing, and the effect of lead in them can affect their developmental capacities and cognitive capacities. So it's some.
I think you cut out for a bit. Still frozen. Due to technical difficulties. A couple moments.
Okay, I guess I will continue this way. I have a double camera now. What I was saying is that in the case of the LA situation is that we are encountering a problem with a battery recycling plant named Exide. Of course, when we think about recycling, it's great. We think, yeah, we should do it. But then what are the implications and the effects of the communities that are surrounding this type of facilities? So yeah, in this case, Exide was one of the companies that was doing this contamination, but well, probably it was doing this recycling and expelling all these fumes to the air that eventually were deposited in the ground. So far, what the government is doing is that they already detected area that is around this facility, that it's 1.7 miles around, and then determine that like more than 10,000 properties are in this area and contaminated by lead. So this is, as you can see, a very massive situation. And yeah, so far a lot of people that are living in those communities, mainly people of color, underrepresented communities, are facing the situation. You can go next. Yeah, this is like a close-up of the PIA area and all the neighborhoods are affected. Next one. And yeah, like as I was mentioning, like this PIA area includes around 10,000, more than 10,000 properties. And the money that the government has for the cleanup is about like for cleaning a little bit like more than 6,000 properties. So of course, like there's a lot of people that won't have access to the cleanup or that are even outside of the PIA area, but still they are yeah, like with the standard of having lead in their soil. So far, just like to give you an update, they have cleaned 3,500 properties, and they are expecting to complete the cleanup by 2025. So as we can see, this is a very slow process, and this is why, yeah, there is more room to do something else, right? So continue. So as we were talking about storytelling, I was thinking of like how art has helped me to communicate this information, and how can sometimes data can be, yeah, as Bani was saying, can make us put our shields, or even in the case if we are suffering the situation, can make us feel overwhelmed. So art, I think, has a capacity to help us go also through those barriers and to really try to start understanding what is moving inside of each of us. You can go next. So in my previous work, I was taking pictures around the very industrial area, and yeah, taking samples of soil that were like in parks in the area, and just like analyzing and trying to absorb what is with our communities are really facing, what is their daily way of living. So you can go next. This put me in 2019 to start thinking of how can I share that experience with other people. And this is an installation that is called Playground. And as you can see, the idea is to have this is a video that is projected, but at the same time, I brought soil that is contained in this bag, and the community or the people that are coming to the exhibition is invited to interact with the soil that is in this contained bag with gloves and everything. So it's of course a commentary of how like people that want to interact with the soil have to be protected while our children are actually exposed to this. So I really think that the power of image is something that we can use a lot in the way that we can share this type of projects. And sometimes I think that we rely a lot on words when information can be absorbed through the senses, through experience, through what a lot of people call embodied experience. You can go next. Yeah, that was like how they were able to play with this soil brought from one of these parks. Next one. This is another project named Vacos, and in this one I was using also projections and videos showing the different participants of this unsustainable system that is like for a city that is built for cars, how this has a direct impact on the amount of batteries that are needed and the amount of batteries that are needed recycling, and how this ends up in our communities and people's backyards. So this installation also had the component of having this ceramic shapes that were underground, and people were invited to walk around them. The ceramic shapes inside contain some of the lead soil that I went to these parks and collected. And the idea was to represent the 29 childcare centers, schools, and parks that were affected by the situation. Next one. At the same time, this was an invitation because I learned about the power of phytoremediation, microremediation, and how plants can absorb lead and contain them into their vacuoles. So this was a direct response, and those pots are actually representing vacuoles. And this was an invitation for people to become, instead of exploiters, to become agents of regeneration. So this was kind of the first approach, you can go next, of learning about the situation and wanting to share. And I feel that when we are sharing stories, when we are, like with this type of projects, we have always, and I feel that that's a way a lot of people can get on board. We can always give the opportunity for action and for hope. And in this case, I was I'm very grateful that I was reached out by a gallery that is based in one of the neighborhoods affected to develop a new project in which we could develop further the topic, but also not just talk about it, but actually doing something. So you can go next. And this is how Prospering Backyards came out. And this is Topher Graphics, which is a gallery that is located in Boyle Heights. Their work is like a focus in promoting the work of Chicano Latinx artists. And they organize a lot of programs promoting that type of art. Next one. They were invited to participate in the Pacific Standard Time Art and Science exhibition, and that's how I'm working with them to produce this exhibition that will be presented in 2024. That is named Things, Places We Call Home. And the idea of this exhibition is to highlight the realities of the environmental disparities faced by people of color And the two sites that this exhibition will be focusing is the Exide plant, and the other one is the former ExxonMobil one. So in this case, I'm one of the artists that is working for this project. Next one. This is the team that has been formed, and I'm very happy and very honored to be part of this amazing group of people. They are from artists, scientists, healers, and we all need, like each of us, we have so many things to contribute, and I'm, like as I'm saying, very honored to have them on board. We also count, next one, with a group of advisors from the Natural History Museum and from in partnership with other organizations. But yeah, this is the team that is behind. But what is the objective of this project? And I'm not sure how am I in time. That's why I'm a little bit talking a little bit fast. But could you go next, Vanya? I just want to share what is exactly the description of this project and what is the objectives. So as I'm saying, it's like basically trying to start with this process of healing, both of soil and of communities. We see that our current reality, that we have the possibility and like the danger of our children being exposed to lead and the implications that happen. The danger of having like this different illnesses, cancer, respiratory illnesses. The fact that there is now a disconnection from soil, there's even a fear of soil. Like instead of people and children being able to go and play outside with the soil and everything, they cannot do that. So of course there is also pain, distrust, anger, and the non-human communities are also disturbed. So what we want to go is move forward soil as a source of life, connection, being able to connect with soil, being able to play in our own backyards, grow our own food. And of course that comes with empowerment of communities and building relationships with each other. Next one. So how are we doing that? We have two main things, and one of them is like we are developing a program of periodical workshops and on soil health topics and art. And this is how we are starting to build this community around soil. At the same time, and we are just about to start this open call for our community science research, Prospering Backyards. And the idea is to develop a method for reducing lead exposure with minerals and other natural methods, considering soil biodiversity and the participation of the community members as community scientists. So maybe, I know that I'm already over the time, so maybe we can just like review very briefly the next slides, just pass them so people can see them. So that's all time, next one. We are having, the idea of developing the community science research, next one. Well, very briefly, I would say that we're developing the methods for sampling, for analyzing lead, for analyzing microbial communities, how are they affected by our methods. And the idea is to use amendments into the soil, a very easy way that people can apply themselves in their own backyards. And probably that will be it. So we can continue with the rest. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Trying to get to the end for your contact information. So thank you so much for all of your presentations. So great to kind of hear the different aspects and integrations of story and community involvement in these environmental projects. We have some time for questions. If folks have anything they want to ask of any of the speakers, feel free to either unmute or paste your question in the chat.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess is addressed to all of the speakers. First of all, thank you, all of you. That was That was really inspiring. Something that's been coming up in my conversations lately is this tension between data and storytelling, because oftentimes decision makers want the data, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on storytelling as a form of data and how we can build that up.
I'm happy to take a stab at that, if that makes sense, Hannah and Mauro. What I frequently say, it's become something of like a cliche in my own work, is that I say storytelling makes data actionable. And they're in some tensions, right? But what I tried to show and what I really firmly believe is that particularly in communities where we don't have data, what I've written about as sort of data apartheid, which is so characteristic of so many environmental justice communities, storytelling can be a powerful tool for generating data streams that don't yet exist. So I think that they work actually very, very well together. But they have to be thought together. And their storytelling or let's say big quant data have different purposes, and they need to be used, I think, in different contexts, but ultimately they're really part of they work really well together. I think that, we know, for example, that we can create as many data-driven story maps as we want, but often the communities that we might be working in have unreliable internet access. So what are those story maps really doing for them? Or that, even while we might have open databases, they're hard for people to understand if they don't already have a kind of pretty high level of data literacy already. So storytelling, I think, allows us to engage. So another thing it can do is that it can engage with audiences like those 8th graders that I was showing that may not yet have the kind of literacy that would enable them to work with huge open data sets. But they can tell a story. And storytelling also allows us, as we think about getting diverse types of data to decision makers, storytelling allows us to introduce qualitative data representing voices and communities who may otherwise go unheard.
I think that was a great response, Bethany. I would also add to that, just as a guide, is just trying to create the most direct and relatable connections. So if you have data, for example, in my case, showing nitrogen deposition in the wilderness, and you have a community like agricultural communities living within several hundred miles of this wilderness, and there's runoff there that might be impacting the wilderness or vice versa, like what kind of conversation can you create that allows people to say, okay, in my life today, the impacts of this farming industry nearby likely are what is causing some of that runoff in the streams that then is impacting the lichens in the forest, or, what is that industry? Is the air moving and there's something happening really far away from us that then we're getting the impacts of downwind? So I think just trying to have that in context too.
Maybe Mara will unmute, and as she's maybe thinking that through, let me just add one more thing that I wish I had said. And it really has to do with that storytelling primer that Vanya gave to us at the beginning of this session, which is that I think what story does is it puts data in relation. So data, naturally, of course, is supposed to be objective, as if, it was created by some disembodied people, like who knows where it came from. But what story does is it connects it to people in place, and therefore it values it in those relationships. So it makes data actually meaningful. Like, why do we care about this data? Like, what is the story? Like, what are its connections to people, place, and our values?
Thank you so much. I love that part that you mentioned about relationship, because I feel that that's the key. And yeah, I was just wanting to add that it's kind of the idea that we want to arrive to people and like appeal to both. I don't know. I'm thinking of like brain and heart. The message will be like more compelling, more like effective if we are able to really yeah, like completely cover all this needs for the message to really keep down. And yeah, relationship to what they consider important, their own families, their own traditions, their own culture. That's another way. So yeah, thank you for this question too.
Thank you all for the very introspective answers, and I love this question. That was actually one of my canned questions, so I'm really happy you asked that. Anyone else want to share any questions, reflections, comments?
One thing that we've been talking about in the museums sphere when which I'm working in is the question of how do we get people emotionally invested in the stories that we're telling. And science has typically been seen as being a very unemotional enterprise and wanting to be very objective and using the data and all of that. So I'm curious what your feelings are, especially given everything you've just said about making sure that you connect those to your more personal aspects of people's lives, where you feel the role of emotional connection lies in the science for everyone.
Well, I want to share that I'm trained as a scientist, and I often felt the limitations of our training, which is like taking out whatever is like emotion or like a direct connection with the situation that you're studying, which is understandable because you want reliable data and yeah, the method it's made like that. But at the same time, yeah, no, we cannot just generalize and assume that scientists don't have like their emotions and like the need to express them. So I feel that it's more like how we are actually allowing scientists to be part and involve themselves in the more of what it's outside of their main focus of a study. And yeah, speaking again from my own perspective, that's why by now, like merging both, now being able to do art work has been for me like a way for self-integration, because there was a need for me to not just like throw numbers, but also to really empathize with what I was like interested in my studies. So I don't know, that's my very particular perspective, but I don't know, I will be curious of the other presenters what I think.
Yeah, I can jump in. It's a great question. And as a science communicator, this is a, investment in the future of science communication. The more people studying science communication, the better the translation between science and non-expert can become. Yay to more jobs. And, but yeah, so I have a background also in museums, and one of the big things, I used to manage the guest experience at the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. And, one of the really fun narratives we would play around with is it's a museum of death and struggle, but it's also telling a climate story of the Los Angeles basin, the past 50,000 years up until this morning when that coffee cup flew into the pit, right? And so what is this sort of, again, talking about that relatable connection, but also using data and science to tell that story, but creating an environment or an experience around that is really important. And also thinking about there are so many different learning styles, and there's so many different impairments that might impact someone's learning style or learning ability, or even their opportunity to see or hear or to move or function in a space. So the more ephemeral and experiential we can transmit some of this information, I think that you can tap into that emotional or sociological side of science to then say, here's real data, and then here's how you can really live it. You can see bubbles coming up in this tar pit. You can see a coffee cup starting to sink or a squirrel getting stuck. We can't do anything about that, but this museum of bones is this story you're seeing in front of you, right? And so just drawing like connections on several levels that people might not have, as we were talking about earlier, do you just give data or do you give a way for them to connect data, right? So that deficit versus here's a lot of knowledge and let's walk through it in a few different pathways so that you can create connections that might be meaningful to you. And then maybe Bethany would tie in with all that opportunity of your students that you worked with, but like then there's a room for someone to say, oh, I've experienced that and I've seen it happen like this, or whatever other opportunity can come from there.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. It was so great. It's such an important question, I think, and I needed some time to think about what I really wanted to say. But what I think that we're hearing, and you were getting at this, both Hannah and Mauro, is that we often operate with a notion of data as pretty like reified, like data. It's somehow neutral, it's out there. But what you are all making us see is, of course, that data has a story, right? They're not different in a very fundamental way. Data is collected by people in places or not, and it's collected for certain purposes. It has a story. And I think one of the most powerful ways that we, whether we're science communicators or environmental humanists, and I think there's a huge overlap there, is that we really can make people really see how data has a social life, right? And if it doesn't have a social life, it's sort of like that tree that falls in the forest that nobody hears. Like, what good does it do, right? And really, I think helping people understand, that science is a social process and a community process is really probably the most important intervention that projects, whether it's Futures Beyond Refining or Lichens or community backyards. I mean, that's what we can really do, I think, with these community science projects.
I like that. Data has a social life. That's very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone's questions and all of your really insightful responses. I wish we had so much more time to talk about this, but I know we are already over our scheduled time, and I just wanted to give a warm thank you for all of our speakers and also all of you for coming on a Thursday morning for some of you. And I will drop a couple links to our notes, our YouTube page, and our event calendar in case folks are more interested in keeping up with Public Lab. This event will be recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel. And if you'd like to stay in touch with us, definitely sign up to the Public Lab page and check out our upcoming events. We have open calls every Tuesday. And if the speakers want to drop in their contact information, I think some of them already have, feel free to do that. And we'll take that into our notes as well. So we'll have a record of people's contact information, and we'll be posting the presentations as well. And we'll link it in the YouTube and in the notes. So thank you everyone so much for coming, and appreciate everyone's time. And I think this was a really energizing start to my day.
Thank you, Vanya. Thank you, Hannah and Mauro, for sharing your work. It was really exciting to get to learn about what you're doing. Bye, everyone. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry about all this difficulties, but thank you, Vanya.